Okay, we're going to work on the digestive system now for a bit, and don't know how many I'm going to make, but we'll see. Okay, functions of the digestive system. You ingest food, you break it down into very small molecules that are absorbed. They go from the intestinal wall, through the wall, into the blood, and they get carried to cells for the cells to use in cell respiration. That's pretty much it. The names. In addition to the digestive system, you hear it called the GI tract for gastrointestinal, and you also hear it called the alimentary canal, and you might have already heard the word hyperalimentation when you're giving somebody food with an IV bag with absorbable nutrients. It's called hyperalimentation. So it's another term. Now the things you're looking at here, this is a transverse section. You can see some organs there. These are the kidneys, just for reference. And up here on the top, there's the liver. It's been cut away right over here to show you the stomach right over there. And that's the spleen. Okay, the processes we're going to go into, and you also see some histology here. We're going to start out with the mouth. We're going to ingest some food. We are going to move that material once it gets into the upper throat, the upper esophagus, sorry. When you start swallowing, you start the process of it voluntarily, but once it gets into your esophagus, partially down, it becomes an involuntary process, and the material is moved along through the organs by peristaltic action, which involves muscle, and just a second, went too far. Right over here is some smooth muscle. These are nuclei right here, and the cells are really long fusiform cells. Along the way, we're going to digest the food. Obviously, we're going to break it down. We do it by two means. One is physical, with mouth and teeth and stomach compression and all that. But the more important way is through chemical digestion with enzymatic breakdown. We're going to have a ton of secretion. You are going to see glands everywhere. And here's one that you already know about. These are goblet cells. Beautiful view of simple columnar epithelium, by the way. And you're going to see a ton of simple columnar. This is about a 40x mag over there. And this is a low power, maybe 4x, something like that. Then, as I mentioned before, the materials are going to be absorbed into the blood through the small intestinal wall, primarily. And then the stuff that doesn't get digested has to go out as feces, and that's going to be defecation. So there's a kind of a run-through of where we're going here. Okay, so let's start with the peritoneal cavity. You may know it already, or you know a name for it already, as the abdominal pelvic cavity. There it is. The diaphragm, by the way, is up here, right above the liver. You can see the liver there. And right down in here, maybe just barely, you see a little bit of the bladder right there. And of course, the female reproductive organs are behind all the intestines. Now, before you think about, well, why is it called the peritoneal cavity instead of abdominal pelvic, let me have you look at this picture. Okay, now look at the yellow membrane. You see it here going all the way around this abdominal pelvic cavity. Well, at least the abdominal cavity. The pelvic cavity is down in here. So you can see this is kind of a smaller cavity within the abdominal pelvic cavity, kind of a lined abdominal cavity. And remember that this is lined with serous membrane. Okay, serous membranes come in pairs, parietal and visceral. Remember the serous membranes are found in three cavities. Parietal, I can't talk. The pericardial, around the heart, the pleural around the lungs, and then the third one is peritoneal, and they all start with P, lucky for you. This gold membrane is the parietal peritoneum, and in blue, lining all the organs in here, there's a lining, and there's a lining, and there's a lining, and they're all kind of attached together with a thin membrane, which actually you see right there. And it's called the visceral peritoneum. And of course, there's a fluid secreted between the two. Here's an example of small intestine right there. And the outside of the small intestine, remember, as well as all these organs, is actually the visceral peritoneum. It's also sometimes called the serosa. You'll see it coming up here in just a second. And look at this membrane coming off right here. All right? It's actually part of the serosa. Well, I pointed out this right here. This is called the mesentery. It holds the intestines together. You can see some of the intestines right there. It's also part of the serosa, or the visceral peritoneum. And then you see this like aprony, fatty-like layer right here. It's called the omentum, singular omentum. There's actually a greater and a lesser. You're looking at the greater omentum here. If I lifted the stomach, which you can see a little bit of right there, you would see another omentum called the lesser omentum right below it, although it's not important to know. Okay, liver, you can see it here. It's the biggest organ there. And when you have liver damage, bad things are going to happen. In addition to, clotting protein problems and ability to break down food, remember that one of the big protein groups of the liver is the albumins. They provide for osmotic pull in blood. And so when there's liver problems and they can't make albumins, you get edema. You get loss of the ability to pull in, keep fluids in your blood. And so for somebody who's got a CTs, I'll show you it in class, very often you'll see an enlarged area of what you would call maybe a gut, I guess, even much bigger than this. And of course, some men particularly have that gut, but that's more from adipose tissue from beer and things like that. I'm talking about fluid accumulation. So this can be really expanded, and it's due to excess peritoneal fluid from liver inefficiency. And this whole area is supposed to be sterile, as is pleural fluid and pericardial fluid. There's not supposed to be any bacteria here. If bacteria get into this area, you've got an infection of the peritoneal cavity. It's called peritonitis, and it's life-threatening. And you might wonder, well, how would that happen? A gunshot wound or a knife wound. Then bacteria get in there from the outside of the body. Or here's part of your large intestine right here, and of course there's appendix right over there. You can't see it. The large intestine has got a humongous population of bacteria. And if that intestine gets perforated, or you have a ruptured appendix and bacteria get out into this space, then you've got peritonitis also. Okay, so I've kind of introduced you already to histology, so let's go inner. We're going to go inner to outer, and there are 4 layers. So esophagus, same 4 layers. Stomach, same 4 layers. Small intestine, large intestine, all the way down to the anus. So those are the 4 major organs where you have these 4 layers. Your whole, from, pretty much of intestine anyway, we're talking about 21, 22 feet. So this is all 4 layers of thickness, including the stomach and the esophagus. Okay, inner. Mucosa layer. It's making mucus. Remember, I was talking about the esophagus, and I said top of the esophagus, different from the bottom 2/3 of the esophagus. The top is going to look like your mouth. It's going to be stratified squamous, just like the mouth and the skin. And then about a third of the way down, it changes over into simple columnar, which it stays all the way to the end. Now, let me remind you about the mucus and epithelial tissue and mucosa. Simple columnar, you see it right there, like picket fence structures. Underneath epithelial tissue, you generally have connective tissue. There it is. That's going to be actually part of the submucosa. Attaching epithelial to the connective is lamina propria, kind of an acellular glue-like material. Look at the things in the mucosa. Goblet cells you'll see more of in just a minute, although I've already introduced you to them. Let me go down to the submucosa, areolar connective tissue, more lymphatic tissue, nerve endings, blood vessels. Remember, no blood vessels in epithelial tissue at all. Okay, so let's move down to the muscle and look at your picture down here, and you'll notice, first of all, let me point out, mucosa is going to be here. Submucosa, by the way, you can have a little bit of a muscle layer there. In between mucosa and submucosa, there's submucosa. Look at the muscle layer right here. It's 3 layers, at least in the stomach. If this were small intestine, you'd only have 2 layers. This is actually a cross-section of the gastric area. Anyway, you got 1 layer, kind of longitudinal, looking at it on lengthwise cells. Then you've got this layer right here where you're actually looking at the cells from the end, as if you're looking at straws from the end. And then right below that you've got another layer, which is, again, lengthwise, as if you turn the straw and look at it, length. The stomach is the only one that's got these 3 muscle layers. All the other guys have got 2. Okay, so let's go to the last layer. By the way, the muscle also makes up sphincters and valves. We'll be talking about that. I've already introduced you to the serosa. I don't think there's anything else to say, so let's move along. Here's a good look showing you on pictorial as well as histology on low power, like a 4X, the different layers. So, mucosa, mucosa, submucosa, you can see it looks different, submucosa, muscle layer, muscle layers, there are 3 of them here, there, and there, and then the serosa out here is kind of the green layer, green-gray, I'm not sure what that is. Okay, good view of different kinds of histology that we're going to see along the way. Here's that stratified squamous that you may have recognized. It looks like skin, but it's also going to be in the upper esophagus. In fact, if you look over here at this guy, this is the upper esophagus, and this really intense purpley is that guy right up there. Now, you're looking at this on a 4X, so it looks very far away. Now, this is mucosa that you're looking at right in here. I'm going to highlight it. Okay, that's mucosa. Alright, now, in a lighter kind of gray-purple, there's your submucosa. So it's this section right in here. Muscle layer right there. And serosa out here. You'll notice there's some other things around here that you're going to be seeing. Right here and here, you see bunches of goblet cells. Again, this is simple columnar. The guy up here at the top right is a low power 4X, and over here is a 10X. But it's going to be simple columnar, which is really what you see right over there. These are goblet cells. And those are the key things there. The guy in the bottom right, the guy in the bottom right is pancreas. We'll talk about him more in a minute. Okay, so movement. I've already mentioned peristalsis. There are some, you see it happening right over here. It's that rhythmic, like scrunching, like rhythmic muscle contraction, pressing, a little bit at a time, and the stuff just moves down slowly. That happens in the stomach too. Now, there are a couple of variations of this rhythmic muscle contraction. Segmentation. We'll talk about it more in the small intestine. Think about a balloon. You know, one of those like little animal balloons. They turn them into animals and twist them and all that. Think about it having ooh, what shall we put in there? Putty. Let's put toothpaste. That's even better. So you fill that balloon, one of those long balloons, in toothpaste, and you put your hands at the left, and you put one hand over there, put one hand like in the middle, and just squeeze left hand, and the toothpaste will kind of shift to the right. Squeeze with the right hand, toothpaste goes to the left. Now move your left hand over about, I don't know, a few inches, squeeze, and the food or the toothpaste goes to the right. Now squeeze with your right hand a little bit over to the right a couple inches, and you'll notice that the food or toothpaste is getting kind of shifted back, forth, but gradually it's moving down. That's called segmentation. You see it in the small intestine. Now, the other place where it's got a little bit different kind of peristaltic action, large intestine. The stuff is really solidified there, way more solid than toothpaste. It would be more like putty. I'm sure you played with putty when you were a kid, particularly hard putty. You know, stays in the can too long, really hard to move. So there you're going to have mass movements. I'll illustrate this in class. Much more muscle contraction to move that more solid food. Nervous control as we go along. Everything is going to be autonomic nervous system. Everything. And the major guy is parasympathetic, not sympathetic. Sympathetic actually decreases digestive function. There are going to be a lot of stretch receptors. As you can already tell, food is going to fill up in the stomach, and it's going to fill up in the large and small intestine, and that's going to set off receptors in the wall, and they're going to send messages to your brain, and your parasympathetic system is going to get activated, and it's going to send messages to the smooth muscle for more peristaltic action, and you know where that's headed. Anyway, okay, so there's going to be a lot of reflexes here, and boy, are you going to see hormones. Okay, good view again of smooth muscle right over here. Okay, moving along, down to the mouth. All right, some of this is really easy. I'm not going to spend any time on. Muscles of mastication. You got quite a few of them, but a couple of major ones. Actually, the major one, masseter muscle, right there. You see it? Big chewing muscle. Also, temporalis. It's not on here. It's been taken off, but the fibers are going this way. And remember your origin insertion. The insertion of the temporalis muscle, which is that guy right there on the temporal bone, goes underneath the zygomatic arch, comes down this way, and the fibers attach right down here at the bottom of the mandible. So temporalis muscle and masseter muscle, it's also has its insertion down at the bottom of the mandible, pulls your jaw up. Then you've got some muscles down in here, platysma a little bit lower, they pull your jaw down. Tongue. Not much that I want to say about it. There it is. The tongue is going to be skeletal muscle. And on the top of the tongue, remember you looked at taste buds last, in 2401, covering over the skeletal muscle, so it's voluntary obviously, you've got stratified squamous on the tongue as well as the inside of the mouth. Highly vascularized, lots of blood vessels. You know when you chew down on your tongue, you bite it, it bleeds. You know about the taste buds. You've got a lingual tonsil. We've talked about tonsils already in respiratory. You've got one at the back of the tongue. And you've got an interesting, actually you find these in a lot of things, a little, that's a connective tissue that kind of holds one thing to another thing. It's called a frenulum. They're in different places around the body. Here's one frenulum. It holds your tongue down so you can't like turn your tongue back to the back of the mouth. There's another frenulum right there holding the underside of the lip to the gum, and you've also got one down here, although you can't see it. Good view of the inside of the cheek, inside of the mouth. Look at all those blood vessels, also highly vascularized. Wanted to mention or bring something back up to your attention from 2401, Bell's palsy. Remember, cranial nerve 7, facial. It innervates muscles of emotion. The zygomatic for smiling, and your frontalis for wrinkling your forehead, orbicularis oculi and oris and all that. And if you have a herpes infection, sometimes that virus will get into the ganglion, which you can actually see right over there, where it is kind of a dormant, latent infection, but it inflames the nerve. And then you've got problems going to all those facial muscles, as well as salivary glands, as well as muscles that keep your eyelid pulled up. And so you see right over here on this right side of the face, a paralysis. It's called Bell's palsy. It affects eye, tear glands on that side, and affects salivary glands. You can't make appropriate saliva on that left side, and so on. Anyway, you covered that in 2401, I hope. All right, moving. Salivary glands. I already introduced them to you. You already know that there's more than one. There's actually 6. There are 3 pairs. You got a picture down at the bottom showing location. This big boy right here, the biggest, parotid, that's the same one you see right there underneath the ear. Even though he's the biggest, doesn't make the most saliva. That's the one that makes the most saliva. And he is that boy right there under the mandible. Both the submandibular and the sublingual, they have ducts, and the sublingual has a bunch of little ducts on the underside of the tongue. Let me go back to, no, wrong way, over here. So the ducts on the sublingual, remember you're looking at the underside of the tongue, the ducts are all along here. You got multiple ducts for the sublingual glands, left side, right side. Now, the submandibular, you've got a duct over here, big one, and you got a duct over here. Now, you can't see it, but I'm sure you know about it, because every once in a while you're talking or you're eating or you're laughing, and there's this like little fountain of saliva that comes out. It can come out a foot. There's, oddly enough, a name for it. It's called gleeking. I don't know who named it. But it's coming from the submandibular gland, and that's the duct. There's only one on each side. Now, the parotid has a different duct. It comes in up here, way back by your molars, the upper jawbone. Okay, I don't think there was anything else on there. Oh, there were some things. Okay, the saliva's got a variety of things in it. We're going to talk more about it. You know what it does. It lubricates, it chemically digests, it helps soften your food, it washes your mouth, it kills bacteria, some. Lysozyme is an antibacterial chemical in saliva. Now, let me remind you, autonomic nervous control stimulates saliva, parasympathetic stimulation carried by 7 facial nerve, 9 glossopharyngeal nerve.